Okay, so you're asking about the sort of production process of the film. So due to, I guess, the framework of production and funding in the United States, we didn't have the financial capacity to just go and shoot. So we had to work within arts organizations, within grant funding and things like that, to do these sort of like sequential visits. So we would go and shoot for sometimes 3 or 4 weeks, sometimes a couple months, and we do it, once a year, and construct a film from these different journeys and the material that we gathered. And part of that kind of approach was also to include different disciplinary, let's say, objectives to each trip. So sometimes we would go with an urban planner. Sometimes we would go with a person who was working with these, 3D scanning tools and using architectural surveillance technology to gather images of the landscapes. And we would work with a poet one year and like an astronomer another year, and we kind of constructed these different journeys into sort of different disciplinary objectives. And then subsequently, because we started going there when Dilma was in office, and there was and the PT, and there was a kind of a soft sort of socialist nature and character to the government, and we saw over the course of time this sort of authoritarian impulse take over Brazil, as it did in many other countries. And we saw the collapse of those regimes and the installation of, ultimately Bolsonaro.
Okay.
Let's see. I see Meredith is.
Okay.
Yeah.
A Machine to Live In is a film that explores architecture, but also relationships between architectures and the dwellers of Brasilia. How did you build your casting? Was it easy to find people like the so-called Black Angels we see in the movie, or within the cults that are flourishing in that very specific city?
Sure. So part of that had to do a lot with the relationship that we had within our group. For example, like our DP and EP, Andrew Benz, was really great in making the decisions of framing individuals within landscapes. And he also has like a very sort of like, animated personality, and he was able to forge a lot of friendships, especially with the motorcycle gang that we're following, and their president. Let me just rewind, then hopefully you can edit it back together. But so a lot of credit goes to Andrew Benz, who was able to not only like frame these shots, but also forge these relationships with the motorcycle gang, especially Regis, who was the president of the Triages, and the different sort of kind of other biker gangs that were involved in the production of that. And then also credit goes to Sebastian Alvarez, who was really kind of interested in exploring relationships with these different esoteric groups and mystical societies, and was very patient and very open, and created sort of not only a kind of a linguistic path, translating from multiple languages, but also creating like a very sort of adhesive and coherent sort of concept for the way that we're going to move between different genres within the film. Sometimes it's a landscape photography, sometimes it has this ethnographic mode, and sometimes it's this more experimental performative thing. Sebastian was really great at like working with Meredith as well on the organizing the choir of children to sing this new anthem to Brasilia that was penned by the sort of unofficial poet laureate of the city.
Would you say that Machine to Live In could be considered as an essay film about a city and its inhabitants?
Yes, we would consider this an essay film. There's different ways of putting it. We've said before it's sort of a visual poem, an essay film. Depends on what you latch onto in the film. Some people latch onto reading the film, and some people side a little bit more with disappearing into the visuals. But it is an essay film.
One of the things that became just really quickly that became very important to us in the writing of the film is that that there's a kind of built-in polyvocal nature to the voiceover, and so it is an essay film, but in many ways it's multiple layers of text, multiple layers of images, and multiple voices. And one thing that we were very conscious about was that that process, right, and privileging certain translations and privileging certain, like understandings and cultural understandings. So now in some ways it's it's an essay film, but maybe it's an essays film, right? There's a built-in plurality.
Right. And I think when I was gone, I'm not sure if Yoni answered this question, but there's different modalities, different methodologies and approaches to the film as well. Different scenes represent different approaches to filmmaking, and that was important to us.
Could you precise what was your main different approaches towards filmmaking?
Well, I think
because we haven't heard you, so let's go.
Yeah, I got the tail end of what Yoni was talking about, but the choir is a really good representation of what I'm talking about. The choir was taking a song that everyone knows and then adapting lyrics from the poet laureate of the city to the song, and it's sort of a celebration and a critique of the city sung by children who represent the future. So that was a scene, at least in my eyes, that's a good representation of how we condense all of these layers. And then other moments are we have very few head and shoulder interviews in the film, but when it happens, we see it in Dr. Takashi, who's an ocular surgeon. He's a cataract surgeon, and he describes how the city itself, the architecture, is harmful to our bodies. And so that's sort of a symbolic moment. And then you see people who pop up in the film, because the film is not about character. It's about the city, but it's neither a city symphony as well. It doesn't really fit neatly into that genre. But we see the people who pop up in the film, they pop up often, and they pop up as different people. They appear as themselves. They appear as different historical figures, or they speak the words of Clarice Lispector, or so there's a little bit of character slippage as well.
Yeah, just quickly, well, one thing we were very fascinated by was the sort of our encounters with one of the sort of largest mystical and religious sect in the Valley of the Dawn, was their ideas of what they called incorporation or disincorporation, the notion that we can inhabit the bodies and the minds of different people, or people from the past, or perhaps like people from other dimensions. So in structuring the film, we kind of built this sort of like nautilus shell sort of structure, where certain narrative ideas are nested within other narrative ideas, certain genres like science fiction or ethnographic film or essay or traditional documentary landscape, for example, is nested within itself, and then these sort of repeating motifs will happen throughout the film.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's repetitive motifs, but it's also going into more and more. That's the impression we have as an audience, into something very mystical and very fictional at the end of A Machine to Live In, because there is that sequence with actors playing Niemeyer, for example, and afterwards there is this very impressive and visual impressive going through a dream city of what could be the future of that city.
Yeah, yeah. There's this kind of a notion in Esperanto in the film where there's this vision of an astral city, right, that exists in the next world, right, and the sort of the image that we're left with is this sort of astral city, right? It's a composite, sort of imagined composite of 3D scans of the actual architectural artifacts, but everything has been rearranged into a kind of a new city, right? A new virtual sort of formation. But yet if you pay attention to the soundscape, the sort of the external forces, personal, but also kind of like the wider sort of collective tensions and anxieties of the world are kind of like breaking through it, right?
My last question would be for both during that very long process of shooting for so many years, and I guess a lot of work also in the editing, how your gaze at this city changed during that long process for both of you?
I think initially, interesting architectural space. There are all these sort of questions of utopia that I was really interested in, and there was also like this presence of like the mystical communities, which for me was like, okay, like this is like where the interesting tension is, right? It's not this question of whether or not utopias work, because we know they don't, but what other sort of possibilities exist within them. There's this real idea for me that if you can't change the world, right, you can create new worlds that will one day take their place. But as we were working on this, like as the like the political realities of the situation both in Brazil and the United States and also other parts of the world. For example, we did like some part of the editing of this film in residence in Budapest in Hungary, right? And so, and in fact, like the editing in Hungary coincided with the election of Trump in the United States. You have Orban, of course, and then there was the impeachment of Dilma and the imprisonment of Lula, and what we have now, the Bolsonaro regime. And so I think throughout this process, I'm still enraptured with the images of Brasilia. And Brasilia is very generous because it does give you these images. But when you look closely at it, you see that it's that these domes, these kind of perfect structures, these pyramids, they're crumbling. They're coming apart. They're lumpy. They have imperfections, and I think like the longer I spent in Brasilia, the more those kind of like imperfections became not only markers of the city, but like markers of the current situation that we're in.
Yeah. And the only thing I would add to that really is I was a little stumped by your question only because I don't really feel like my opinion of Brasilia has changed throughout the 8 years that we've been working on the film. That's not really how I would put it. We went to Brasilia every summer for 8 years. And so we had a lot of time in between to look at the edit, to re-edit and recontextualize scenes, to move things around. And then every time we went there, we sought out, or we did more research, or we were introduced to new people. And they really enriched our research, and we dove into different unearthed histories and reading more Clarice Lispector and I feel like my view of Brasilia has only gotten thicker and more layered and richer and more disturbed. But I kind of, I think the same for Yoni too. We went into the film and the situation already sort of having an understanding of the script that we wanted to research. Not that we had a view of the city already defined, but yeah, we just kind of wormholed deeper.
Yeah,
I
and
don't think my opinion has changed.
and also, I mean, for me, like watching the film now within quarantine and the sort of conversation about who are essential workers and who aren't, you know, I come to see that the film is really about the who and what is essential in the functioning of any city, and all these images we have of the people who have to wash these monuments, paint these monuments, clean the monuments, work through all these like hidden passages and tunnels and maintenance spaces. It's like these are kind of like the film. These are the people who the film wants to be with. And I don't know, watching it now, I can't help but see the sort of like essential nature of their labor.
Yeah, and that's I think I've always seen the film that way. Right from the beginning, I really there's that scene where we take a drone and we slowly raise ourselves above the bus station, and at first it's kind of hard to see where we are, but we're above nearby the bus station, where you see these layers of roads built on top of each other, the infrastructure, and then we go immediately to the bus station, and the text is really important there to talk about how all buses, basically their routes go into the city in the morning and out from the city in the evening. And that's centered around the concept that the city is upheld and maintained by the workers. And that's like right in the middle of the film too. And I think that's one of the most important scenes.
And then they can't live there, right? They can the workforce is migrated in and out, but there's no place for them within this idea of of a utopia.
Right.
Sure.
Okay.
Cool. And if you don't mind, because I just kind of I was stumbling in my words. Can I repeat this line about the structure of the film is like a nautilus shell? Is that
Okay, let's go.
Can we do that? Okay, sorry.
I will warn Delphine about that.
Yes. Okay.
Just to be patient.
Sure,
okay.
Sure. Yeah, so, like in thinking about the way that we wrote the script and the way we structured the film, it takes the form of this sort of nautilus shell in which different narrative structures and genres are nested within each other.
Right. And then later in the film, you'll see in moments like the 3D architecture, the composited architectural scans, where we create a new city out of those scan spaces. You'll hear the horse come back, the sound of the horse coming back, and the scanning of the buildings and everything. So it just leapfrogs throughout the film these references to moments before.
Okay. Thank you for indulging me.
That's okay for both of you?
Yep. Thank you so much. All right.
Great.
Thank you so much.
It was a pleasure to converse a bit with you in the virtual life. I hope that we would have a new occasion to meet in real life. I wish you. I hope that our jury will be very sensitive to that masterpiece of our Berlin Line competition. And have a very nice day, both of you. And
thank you so much.
Thank you again for the magnificent setup.
Oh, yes. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.